Many of us have noticed and many of us have wondered. 2022 saw no less than 51 shows that featured major Woman Love Woman characters end last year. For the list of shows that kicked the bucket, check out my recent video, link in the title cards, and since that video I found a lot more that I'll list at the end of this video, so stay tuned. So, what is going on? Are our shows being disproportionately affected? Are we Sapphics being unduly targeted with what might be called the Great Lesbian Cancellation? Let's dig in. We've had a literal explosion of shows over the last decade that feature queer ladies in them. This explosion is due hands down to streaming. Netflix led the way, jumping from being a mail-order DVD company with limited online streaming of existing content to making its own content. They knew that as licensing deals expired on beloved shows, owners would want them back to put on their own streaming platforms, and Netflix needed to stay competitive. In anticipation of that, they went about building a library with gusto, and original content now makes up 50% of their US offerings as of August 2022, with the expectation of increasing that percentage over the next few years. They started with House of Cards in 2011 and followed that up with Orange is the New Black in 2013 to roaring success, sending shockwaves through the TV industry when they got award recognition. Netflix went on to commit billions to producing original content in a throw it at the wall and see what sticks approach. And queer ladies were being thrown at the wall along with everything else. You can see the dramatic rise of queer characters through the GLAAD's Where We Are in TV annual report. In the 2010 to 2011 report, before original online content was launched, there were 28 main or recurring Woman Love Woman characters on network and cable TV, which is a huge contrast with the 326 Woman Love Woman characters of the 2021 to 2022 season. This is a 1,064% increase in representation. Wild! With the success of shows like Orange is the New Black with its bisexual lead and multiple queer storylines, it dangled the proverbial carrot in front of TV execs. Perhaps wider audiences were ready for Sapphic-led content. Maybe money could be made from stories about ladies loving ladies. So, Woman Love Woman representation has improved, with streaming platforms largely leading the way in providing more and better representation, and then came 2022. Let's contextualize the cancellation with some numbers. I had to do a bit of scrounging around to get data points, and I want to make it clear that these numbers don't hold up to any kind of academic rigor. They are approximates only because I simply don't have access to better numbers. But given how little real information exists, I think these numbers are still useful to get a high-level picture. After cross-referencing multiple lists on shows cancelled in 2022, I compiled a list of 163 US shows gone. Statista.com counted 599 originally scripted shows in the US in 2022, giving us a cancellation rate of around 27%. We have, as mentioned earlier, 51 shows announced as cancelled with Woman Love Woman in a major or reoccurring role in 2022. From that, I conservatively counted about 90 characters, with GLAAD identifying 326 Woman Love Woman characters for the 2021 to 2022 TV season. That meant we lost around about 28% of Woman Love Woman characters from our screens. Of the cancelled shows, I would describe 25, or about half of them, as having Sapphic characters as the lead character, such as Work in Progress, Lily and Astrid Saved the World, and The Imperfects, as opposed to main or reoccurring characters like The Wilds, Vampire Academy, and Rentified. Is that high? Without knowing how many Sapphic shows remain with Sapphic characters in the lead role following this great purge, and I've run out of time to try and create such a list, it's impossible to say, although my gut reaction would say yes. There aren't many shows with Sapphics in the lead role to begin with. They tend to be relegated to second billing or lower, so to lose 25 has to be significant. How about male love male shows? Not being up on that kind of content, I did some research and I uncovered 15 scripted male love male shows, some of which overlap as they also had Sapphic characters in them too. There may be more, but I couldn't find them. So let's assume 2 male love male characters on average per show, and that gives us about 30 male love male characters gone. Thus, we lost 11%. Immediately, we see a massive disparity. Women make up half of the queer characters, but they were 2.5 times as likely to get cancelled. It's harder to pull numbers for how many straight characters departed our screens, but I did some extrapolation. GLAAD reported that queer characters made up 11.9% of primetime scripted broadcast TV. If we take that as the overall number across all platforms, which is probably not off the mark, knowing there were 637 queer characters altogether, we can estimate about 5,353 characters total. That gives us 4,716 straight characters. That gives us 1,457 straight characters, or 27%, no longer on our screens. Imperfect data, to be sure, but at least it gives us an idea. So what I'm seeing is that in spite of what has felt like a hemorrhaging of Woman Love Woman characters, it doesn't appear to be disproportionately higher than the number of straight characters getting axed. It's just that given how many less Sapphic characters there are, each lost Sapphic character holds a much greater significance, especially when they are the leads of their show. The significantly lower percentage of male love male characters gone is something different, more on that later, and suggests there are forces working against Woman Love Woman shows. We're seeing the cancellations as the final outcome of something that we have very little insight into. What I want to dig into is what is underpinning these cancellations. To understand this, it's important to understand the context in which all of these cancellations have taken place. Firstly, to understand how shows are being assessed for renewal, and that is fundamentally a show needs to make money. At the end of the day, that's the bottom line. Broadcast TV makes its money through selling ad space. The more people watching a show, especially in the 18 to 49 demographic, the more they can charge. It's got its nuances, but it's fundamentally about overnight ratings. There are other factors which go into assessing the viability of a show, like the cost of production, licensing arrangements, who owns the show, syndication potential, international sales, and I'm sure more, but at its core, it's the ratings. Cable started out as subscription-based and then began to introduce ads and therefore follow a similar criteria for renewing a show. With subscription-based on-demand viewing, however, the definition of a successful show is different. The following information is about Netflix, but I imagine all streaming services have a similar approach. From what I can gather, the single most important metric is the completion rate of a show within the first month of release. With streaming content now leaning heavily into serialized storytelling, the likelihood of an audience member tuning into a second season of a show is entirely related to that person finishing the previous season. Low completion rates is the primary reason given for why First Kill and Warrior Nun were cancelled. Added to that, these shows had higher production costs given their CGI requirements, multiple locations, action sequences, and large casts, meaning that they needed to clear bigger overall viewership numbers for renewal than, say, Heartstoppers, the low-key gay high school teen romance which First Kill has frequently been compared to. Comparing the watch hours of Heartstoppers to First Kill or Warrior Nun will only leave people confused. Heartstoppers had a shorter episode length compared to the other two, and it was filmed in a school with young, non-established actors, which would have saved a huge amount on production costs alone, and therefore would have made renewal easier to attain. Without publishing completion rates or production costs, it's impossible to have any further meaningful conversation about it, other than to say that Netflix's watch hours is a largely useless metric and anything other than providing the most broad of strokes on what is successful. Next to completion rates, there are further metrics that Netflix calculates to assess the viability of a show. These metrics are the adjusted view share, impact value, and efficiency score. What goes into calculating these numbers? It's a secret recipe. But high-level, adjusted view share takes things like new subscribers versus subscribers who seldom watch Netflix versus those who watch a lot and are weighted differently. That view share is then translated into an impact value number. How much money did the show bring in based on who watched it? The efficiency score then takes that impact value number and divides it by how much the show cost to make. The higher the resulting number, the better for the show. For example, Squid Games had an efficiency rating of 41.7 with its record-breaking 1.65 billion watched hours in the first 28 days. What are the efficiency scores for the Woman Love Woman shows that were cancelled? We simply don't know. Therefore, being on Netflix's top 10 most watched list, unless it's pulling in really big numbers, doesn't really matter. Okay, with that understanding established, let's take a look at the Woman Love Woman shows cancelled in 2022. So, some shows simply didn't perform. It's true, they flopped out of the gate. Based off reviews, I Know What You Did Last Summer is one, and Naomi another. Some shows, about 30% in this case, came to a natural end like Kevin Can F*** Himself and Madre Solo e Dos. 60% of these shows were fantasy genre shows and had almost all of them aimed at teens and young adult. That is a lot of teen fantasy. With so much competition, I wonder if there has been a saturation point reached for this type of content, much in the same way the dystopian YA novel genre reached saturation with the Divergent book series in the early 2010s, which effectively collapsed the genre. If that is the case, seeing so many of these shows cancelled is perhaps not such a surprise. True or not, things have not been helped by massive upheavals going on with networks and streaming providers. The CW, who has specialised in fantasy shows aimed at young adults, has long been particularly inclusive with its queer characters and has been going through an acquisition by Nexstar, US's largest television station owner. This saw CW drop a slew of content in preparation. These cancellations make up 20% of all cancelled Women Love Women media. The fact that the cancellations all seem to target LGBTQ inclusive shows is obviously not lost on me. The CEO, Mark Pedowitz, went on record saying that the content of the shows, i.e. the gayness of the shows, was not a factor in their cancellations. True or not, at the very least, this acquisition has resulted in unprecedented and atypical cancellations for the network. So, what of the rest? Well, while CW has been slimming down to appeal to Nexstar, AT&T's newly divested Warner Media, now called Warner Bros. Discovery, has also been making big moves. Warner Bros. Discovery owns Discovery Plus, as well as HBO, HBO Max, the Oprah Winfrey Network, TNT, and Adult Swim, among others. HBO Max is poised to merge streaming platforms with Discovery Plus. All in all, Warner Bros. Discovery had 7 shows cancelled in 2022 under its various umbrellas, contributing to about 13% of cancellations. Netflix contributed to 23.5% of Sapphic shows cancelled, as it too has started a transition. With over a decade of making original content under its belt, it has, for the first time since starting that endeavour, begun to curb its spending. Judging by the articles I read, we can expect to see these numbers continue to drop. The trend has been clear for some time. The one-season Sapphic show is pretty much a joke at this point. But Netflix, having scaled its original programming initiative, is, I believe, going to get more specific about what it makes and what it doesn't make based on a decade's worth of data. Massive hits like Squid Games and Stranger Things seem to be the way Netflix and other streaming services are headed. Netflix shelled out $270 million for season 3 of Stranger Things. Amazon paid an eye-watering $715 million between the production costs and the rights for Lord of the Rings, making it the most expensive show ever made. Disney Plus had WandaVision with $225 million for the season. HBO Max came out with House of Dragons at $220 million, and Apple Plus plunged $120 million into the fantasy show See. There is definitely a trend for large, epic, franchised fantasy and superhero shows, echoing the way theatre movies have evolved. It's all about big, big, and bigger. Something that, as Matt Damon pointed out, was the result of lucrative DVD sales plummeting to nothing in the mid-2000s, and then stripping the mid-tier theatre release movie market that relied on those DVD sales to make up revenue. It's just my feeling, but I suspect we're poised for a similar slide with original streaming content. I expect there will be less shows made. The shows will be bigger budget and safer bets, in inverted commas, where built-in audiences already exist for a property. It'll get harder for niche content to get greenlit. And let's be clear that Sapphic TV is a small niche. Part for successes like Orange is the New Black and Killing Eve or Arcane, and quite possibly The Last of Us, which is currently releasing, the list of Sapphic-led shows that have tapped into a broader audience is thin on the ground, in spite of a not inconsiderable number of Sapphic shows now existing. Where male love male shows have a certain demographic of straight women who avidly support gay romance stories and fiction, there is even a book written on the subject, Women Love Women does not experience the same kind of support, and I expect that this is the reason why male love male shows haven't seen the same culling Women Love Women shows have. What I think this really comes down to is systemic issues that mean wider audiences aren't interested in our stories. I imagine it stems from internal biases against female and Sapphic-led stories, so systemic misogyny, if you will, with execs being largely indifferent. They seem happy to try out a Sapphic show, take a surprise success, but stop short of actively supporting it with things like promotional budgets to help get the word out there. It's not the case of execs gleefully rubbing their hands together as they hit the cancel button on yet another of our shows. For them, it really comes down to money, and it would appear that money is not what Sapphic shows are making. I don't think Netflix is lying about why it cancelled Warrior Nun or First Kill. To them, it's just a logical result of the performance data they have. The solution? Well, this particular iteration of Woman Love Woman Erasure, unlike the Bury Your Gays issue, is not as simple as campaigning for companies to stop cancelling our shows as Clexa fans did when they campaigned for people to stop killing our characters off. What we need is more audiences to pay to watch Sapphic-led stories. We need more women behind the scenes. We need more queer women behind the scenes who are writing, directing, showrunning, being mentored, having their skills honed. We need a society that values women-led and Sapphic-led stories. We're seeing the result of how Sapphic content is valued just as it always has been throughout history, a footnote of the film and TV industry that gets left behind when things get tough. With this state of affairs, the pessimistic part of me wouldn't be surprised if we've reached a peak in Sapphic content creation as streaming services get more competitive and knuckle down on low-performing content in favour of those with broader appeal. And I expect that we shall continue to see shows get cancelled, which frankly sucks, because as many have expressed, it's tiring to repeatedly find good Sapphic content only to have it axed before it even has a chance to prove itself. A lot of shows, Sapphic or not, get cancelled regularly, but our options are always smaller and therefore felt all the more, especially with all the battles that we've had to fight to get this far. So I think there are systemic issues around misogyny and homophobia that disadvantage Woman Love Woman content, and wider audiences simply don't seem interested on a large enough scale to make up the stats for renewal. We've also had a turbulent year where our three biggest providers of Sapphic content were in a state of transition, leading to cancellations left and right, alongside a number of other programs getting the boot too. The high-level stats I uncovered didn't seem to indicate that we were being unduly targeted, and given just how many streaming services there are out there now, I expect we'll see more big changes in the landscape of broadcast and streaming in the future that could mean the end of a golden era of Sapphic TV making. It's not all bleak though. There has been a concerted effort for more diversity in storytelling, and this can be tangibly seen not only in the rise of queer representation, but in the rise of female characters and the rise of racial diversity. GLAAD has noted that female characters have risen from 43% to 47% over the last decade, indicating a move towards gender equity on our screens. Racial diversity has risen from 22% to 47.6% in the same time. 50% of the Woman Love Woman characters in the 2021 to 2022 TV season were non-white. Diversity behind the scenes has been getting better, and this can only bode well. Perhaps as these changes continue, as more attempts are made to present interesting and layered Sapphic representation, we may also see a shift in how Sapphic content is received. Shows like Killing Eve, the ending aside, movies like Carol and Portrait of a Lady on Fire as breakthrough sensations are hopeful indicators that Sapphic stories can gain traction with audiences outside of our little niche. What are your thoughts? Let me know. If you haven't already, I recommend you check out my history of Sapphic film and TV to find out how Woman Love Woman film and TV has been treated in the past. And until next time, lady lovers.